Wall Street lower today after the Dow fell 334 points yesterday. That's nearly 2%, and it's the biggest drop for the Dow for the year. The Nasdaq and S&P 500 down more than 2%. Economist Diane Swak with Mesirow Financial says worries over European economies are partly to blame.
Basically, the fear is whatever is going on in Europe will come back to haunt us. It may not be affecting the economy negatively now, but down the road it could have a second shoe to drop that could undermine growth in the U.S.
Those concerns after Germany, the biggest economy in Europe, reported its weakest year-on-year export growth in 5 years. And the DAX in Germany down 1.9% right now. The FTSE in London and the CAC 40 in Paris both down more than 1%. U.S. futures contracts also lower. Dow futures contract down 2.2% this morning. This is NPR News.
It is 8:04. I'm Kyle Norris with Michigan Radio News. In the weather forecast today, it's going to be sunny and cooler than yesterday, highs around 55. Tonight, mostly clear skies with some patchy frost. Overnight, lows around 30. The two leading candidates for Michigan governor face off in their only debate this Sunday. Republican incumbent Rick Snyder and his Democratic challenger Mark Schauer will square off in a town hall meeting at Wayne State University. Snyder is beginning to take a lead over Schauer, according to recent polls, but Schauer says he does not see the debate as a make-or-break event.
This race is going to be very close until Election Day, but I think it's a very good opportunity for the public to see there's a difference between candidates.
Michigan's economy and education spending are expected to be major topics during the hour-long debate. A growing list of national political leaders is visiting Michigan to campaign for their party's candidates on the November ballot. Michigan Radio's Virginia Gordon reports.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton will campaign at a public event next Thursday for Democratic candidates Gary Peters for U.S. Senate and Mark Schauer for governor. Clinton's appearance will follow First Lady Michelle Obama's visit Friday to support Peters and Schauer. Republican VIPs also have come to Michigan to drum up votes for GOP candidates, including Governor Rick Snyder and U.S. Senate hopeful Terry Lynn Land. Former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney and New Jersey Governor Chris Christie campaigned here in recent weeks, and former Florida Governor Jeb Bush is scheduled to do the same on Monday. For Michigan Radio News, I'm Virginia Gordon.
Toledo is facing the possibility of losing one of its most treasured icons, the Jeep Wrangler, which has been built in the city since the 1940s. Michigan Radio's Tracy Samilton reports.
The Jeep Wrangler is Fiat Chrysler's third best-selling vehicle in the U.S., but CEO Sergio Marchionne says the next Wrangler may use more aluminum to meet tougher fuel economy standards, and he says it would cost too much to retrofit the Toledo plant. Toledo and Ohio officials are lobbying Fiat Chrysler to try to keep the Wrangler. The company issued a statement after a meeting in Toledo on Thursday, saying Fiat Chrysler remains committed to producing vehicles in Toledo, where it also builds the Grand Cherokee, and that it anticipates employment will remain at current levels. That's about 4,800 blue-collar workers. I'm Tracy Samilton, Michigan Radio News.
Environmentalists are blasting a new bill that would repeal Michigan's renewable energy standard. Current state law requires utilities to produce 10% of their energy using renewable sources by 2015. Michigan's major utilities say they're on track to meet that goal. James Clift is with the Michigan Environmental Council. He says most Michiganders support the state's renewable energy standard.
I think they've seen the benefits of the law that we passed in 2008 in terms of economic development opportunities, improved public health, nice, stable, low rates for energy moving forward.
State Representative Tom McMillan introduced the legislation to repeal the renewable energy standard. He says if those benefits exist, the state should not have to mandate renewable sources. Detroit is considering an ordinance to ensure so-called community benefits come with future development projects. But as Michigan Radio's Sarah Swick reports, it's drawing some fierce pushback.
The so-called Urban Development Agreement has been in the works for more than a year. It would make sure large-scale developments offer some guaranteed benefits, like jobs and protections for host communities. Recently, business groups in the city's development arm, the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, have scaled up the pushback. City Council member Raquel Castañeda Lopez says backers have welcomed input from those groups, but the DEGC in particular has been resistant.
They're just kind of saying no, and it's bad policy, and it's not good for development.
DEGC head Roderick Miller warned the council not to pursue the ordinance in a letter this week. Miller called it, quote, the quickest way to undo all we have done to create a positive environment for new investment in Detroit. I'm Sarah Swick, Michigan Radio News.
Gasoline prices are falling in Michigan. The prices are falling faster in West Michigan. Some gas stations outside Grand Rapids are charging $2.75 a gallon, while in Ann Arbor, prices are still hovering around $3.30. Patrick DeHaan is with GasBuddy.com.
It's like a marathon. Everybody's going to end up with very similar gas prices, but areas like West Michigan have already kind of completed the marathon, whereas Detroit and the eastern half of the state still have a little bit of a race to run.
DeHaan says gas prices may continue to trend lower into December and possibly January. Organizers of the Art Prize competition in Grand Rapids are getting ready to reveal the winner of the annual event's $200,000 top prize. The winner will be announced at a ceremony tonight. The 19-day Art Prize is open to any artist. The 1,500 entries have come from artists in 42 states and territories and 51 countries. The public can vote using their mobile phones and the internet. An additional $300,000 in juried awards is decided by a group of international art experts. The first round of voting produced 20 finalists. The works will remain on display in Grand Rapids until Sunday. Today in the weather forecast, it's going to be sunny and cooler than yesterday, highs around 55. Tonight, mostly clear skies with some patchy frost overnight, lows around 30. Tomorrow, frosty in the morning, sunny during the day, highs around 55. And then on Sunday, we do have a slight chance of rain, highs around 60. Support for NPR comes from the Pew Charitable Trusts, driven by the power of knowledge to solve today's most challenging problems. That's at pewtrusts.org. It's Michigan Radio, your NPR news station.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Rachel Martin. We're going to sit down now with an exceptional woman in the U.S. military. She is one of 200,000 women now serving.
We have reported in the past as women have taken on combat roles and risen to high rank. What we hear in this conversation is just what it takes for a woman to reach one of the highest positions in all the military.
This year, Michelle Howard became both the first woman and the first African-American woman to be promoted to the rank of 4-star admiral. Her story is part of our series on the changing lives of women.
Throughout the past 20 years of promotion, she's been among the first at every step, doing things so rare she's been asked to give interviews and speeches on women's issues. Once, she even called her mother to complain.
I was whining about it, and she said, you are where you are historically. As long as you stay in the Navy, this will not stop. Embrace it now, or leave the Navy.
She did embrace it and is now the second in command of the U.S. Navy. Her staff ushered us into her office at the Pentagon the other day, and she told us about her career. Being a woman was not her biggest barrier.
People focus on the barriers, what would have been gender barriers in my career. I grew up in a country where I was African American. My first negative initiation to being black was in kindergarten, when kids started to call me the N-word on the playground. I didn't know what it was about. I just knew it was bad. And I'm running home crying. And my father's like, you gotta toughen up. This is the country you live in. You have a series of things that happen to you growing up that people who are in the majority don't experience. They don't experience driving across country as a family and not being able to get a hotel and sleeping in the car.
That happened to your family?
This is the 60s. People are marching in the street, Martin Luther King. People are being water hosed for the right to vote. And my dad making us sit at a table in a restaurant as we're driving across country because we can't get service. And we're going to sit there for hours to prove a point. We didn't get served, but we made our point. And it's interesting. It gives you an awareness of politics at a very young age.
She was only 12 when she decided she wanted to join the Navy, but at the time, women were legally barred from enrolling at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. If the ban was still in place in a few years' time, Howard's mom told her they'd fight it.
Well, sue the government. And it was a teaching moment. She said, look, if you believe it's right, you need to go after it. But you have to understand things like this are a long process. But you have to do things that are right, not just for you, that you might not benefit, but somebody else will benefit.
So you were prepared to be someone who would look around in a room at the academy and feel like you were the only one.
Yes.
But just because you're prepared for something doesn't mean that you can always navigate that when it happens. Have there been moments when you have been unfairly singled out in your career because of your race or your gender?
I would say yes, and I would also acknowledge that there probably have been times that I probably would never have known. Everybody has critics in life, and when I talk to women, I talk a lot about this. I have found that women who choose to be stay-at-home moms deal with a set of critics. I found women who go into the workplace and try and be a mom have a set of critics. I think as women, we just seem to have a set of critics. And so you work your way through. But I've also found that a lot of times in an organization, the barrier gets down to an individual. There's not a grand conspiracy going on. It's really one person with a set of beliefs, and you just have to take a deep breath, think about it, but have the courage to figure out how to get to resolution with that one person. Otherwise, you end up being skeptical about mankind, untrusting of mankind, and you create this figure of the man in your head, and it really isn't that at all. So you have to let some of the emotions of previous experience sets go as you work your way up or are on the journey.
You've also talked about the need to stay close to people who look like you, who share some of your own experience.
Yes.
Why? Why is that so important, and what has that ended up looking like for you?
It's the transference of wisdom. You can either go figure it out on your own and stumble and have what you're trying to do not be successful, or you can talk to someone who has the same shared experiences. As you expand that group and bring them together and have a multitude of perspectives, you'll find some commonality.
How did you do that when there weren't people that you could look up to, the people who were above you, who you could look to as mentors?
I don't believe mentors have to look like you to be good mentors, or your protege must look like you. The folks who work for me, work with me, my whole career have not looked like me. And as a leader, I'm obligated to help them be successful. I'm responsible for them.
Admiral Howard is also responsible for helping the U.S. Navy combat an issue that has plagued all branches of the military, sexual assault. She cites a study by the Centers for Disease Control showing that the rates of sexual assault in the military are the same as they are in the civilian world. But she says the military needs to do better.
As a leader, I go, I want my sailors and Marines to be the icon of citizenship. So I have to get after this, because we have got to be the leaders in an area like this. Then in terms of what we do at sea, women are in this society. Women are in war. The question is what role? We have moved out in this country that the role we can have in war, in conflict, in combat is beyond the support role. So we're there.
Does that mean women have a role in Special Operations Forces?
Yes, they do. We will see whether or not our government decides that they do have that role.
Are you pleased when you look around now at the new classes at the Naval Academy, or the women who are in your ranks? The military has changed.
Over all of our sailors. I am astounded that we have a generation that has been steadily volunteering into the armed forces since 9/11. Volunteering into a two-campaign war, men and women, for the last 13 years. How could you not be anything but proud to serve with such patriots?
Admiral Michelle Howard, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
And now this. The comedian Jan Hooks died yesterday. She was 57, far too soon. Yet there was no other way to say goodbye to a comedian than to laugh.
She made millions laugh on NBC's Saturday Night Live, spoofing the likes of Nancy Reagan, Hillary Clinton, and scandal-prone televangelist wife Tammy Faye Baker.
That's when I got addicted to all manner of flu pills, and I hallucinated cats on the ceiling. I did, didn't I, honey? And sometimes their heads would vaporize and explode, and...
That was Jan Hooks on Saturday Night Live, and here she is on NBC's 30 Rock playing a stage mother from hell.
This show will have laughter, tears, topless arguments, infections caused by jacuzzi water.
I knew it. I knew you had something up your sleeve besides a tattoo with, let me guess.
It's a mermaid doing it with Captain Morgan.
Maybe her most famous role was as part of an SNL lounge act, the Sweeney Sisters. Once they serenaded the singer Paul Simon.
We couldn't resist cooking up a little something for you, Paul.
And I gotta confess, we're not gourmet.
Cheers to you, Mrs. Robinson. Jesus loves you more than you will know.
Jan Hooks played characters different from herself and made people laugh, pulling them away for a moment from their troubles. Hey, it's Morning Edition. Thank you, Ernie.
And you are listening to Michigan Radio, your NPR news station. We will hear from two doctors who help treat Ebola patients in Africa. That's coming up on StoryCorps in 5 minutes. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kyle Norris. Support for NPR comes from MHI Global, committed to empowering sales team performance and customer management excellence. You can learn more at mhiglobal.com. CFP, on behalf of Certified Financial Planner Professionals, committed to the highest standard in personal financial advice, as it letsmakeaplan.org, and Zurich, providing risk management and insurance solutions for those who truly love their business. Learn more at zurichna.com.
On the next Fresh Air, novelist and satirist Gary Steinbach. He was a wheezing asthmatic boy of 7 when his family emigrated from the Soviet Union to Queens, New York in 1979 after Jews were allowed to leave. He writes about his coming of age in his funny but emotional memoir, Little Failure, which is now out in paperback. Join us.
We have Fresh Air at noon, again tonight at 8. Here are the latest in news headlines. A Spanish nurse with Ebola, who just hours ago was described as critical and deteriorating, is now listed in stable condition. She's the first person known to have contracted Ebola outside the outbreak zone in West Africa. She had been helping treat a Spanish missionary who became infected in West Africa and later died. Dairy Queen is the latest store to reveal a hack of its customer data. The ice cream and fast food chain says hackers may have gained access to customer names, credit and debit card numbers, and expiration dates at 400 stores. And Michelle Obama is making a Detroit campaign stop for Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Gary Peters and candidate for Governor Mark Schauer. The Michigan Democratic Party says the First Lady will appear today at Detroit Music Hall. And today it's going to be sunny and coolish outside, highs around 55.
There were 2 major decisions last night about voter ID laws. In Texas, a federal judge struck down that state's strict voter ID requirement, calling it unconstitutional. At just about the same time, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an order blocking Wisconsin from implementing its voter ID law in this year's election. These are the latest in a number of court rulings involving voting rules. This is happening just weeks before the election, of course. We're joined in the studio by NPR's Pam Fessler, who covers voting issues. Pam, let's start in Texas. What did the judge rule there?
Well, Texas has one of the strictest voter ID laws in the country, and voting rights groups have been challenging it as discriminatory. Last night, District Court Judge Nelva Gonzalez Ramos agreed. She had a very strongly worded opinion. She said the law discriminated against Hispanic and African American voters because they're less likely to have the required government-issued photo ID and also might have a more difficult time getting it. She said the law effectively imposed a poll tax because some voters would have to pay to get documents such as a birth certificate in order to get a photo ID. And perhaps most importantly, she found that the state enacted the law with the actual intention of discriminating, which is very significant. I should say within minutes of the decision, the Texas Attorney General's office issued a statement saying the state would immediately immediately appeal this decision. So this is definitely not the last we're going to hear about this, and it's still an open question whether, in fact, Texas voters will have to show ID this election season.
Okay, and the second state, Wisconsin, what happened in that case?
That's right. So last night, the Supreme Court blocked a federal appeals court ruling that had allowed the state's voter ID law to go into effect this year. So this now means that Wisconsin voters do not have to show photo ID at the polls this year. We had 3 justices dissented, Samuel Alito, Antonin Scalia, and Clarence Thomas. But interestingly, in the dissent, Justice Alito said that imposing the ID law so close to the election was troubling. And that was one of the main arguments that opponents of the law had made, that it just was too close to the election to put something like this into effect. The law had been on hold for about 2 years while it was being challenged in court. But in September, a federal court ruled that it could go into effect. By that time, the state had already sent out absentee ballots without the voter ID instructions on them. They were having to go back, try and contact all those voters and say, you have to send in a photo ID for your absentee ballot to count. So as you can imagine, it was quite a mess. Now that will not be the case. Those votes will count.
All right, but these were not the only rulings by the Supreme Court in recent days on voting laws.
So that's right. There's been a lot of activity. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court reversed a decision by a federal appeals court that had blocked part of North Carolina's voting law from going into effect. So that means that voters in North Carolina this year cannot register and vote on the same day. And if they cast a ballot in the wrong precinct, even accidentally, the vote won't count as it has in the past. Also last week, the Supreme Court voted to allow Ohio to cut some of its early voting.
But this is happening so close to an election. I mean, as you've just explained, that can make things more complicated. What's the reason behind this timing?
Right, this is highly unusual, and the big reason is, as you recall, there were a lot of new voting laws passed in recent years in state legislatures, mostly Republican legislatures. Voting rights groups have had to turn to the courts to try and block these laws. They argue that most of them are discriminatory and that they are aimed at minority and other voters who tend to vote Democratic. Sponsors of the law, on the other hand, argue that the laws actually prevent very few eligible voters from casting ballots. They say they're needed to help protect against voter fraud, although there's been little evidence in court that this is a big problem. We're going to see a lot more of litigation in the next year on this issue.
Yep. NPR's Pam Fessler. Thanks so much, Pam.
Thank you.
It is Friday morning, which is when we hear from StoryCorps, and today we hear from Ann Perfield and Michelle Dines. They are epidemiologists at the CDC, and they've spent the last several weeks in Sierra Leone. They've been responding to the Ebola outbreak. They both volunteered, and when they returned to the United States, they came to StoryCorps.
One day I had gone out in one of the villages and I met a woman who was crying. She said, I've lost 10 members of my family and 2 of them died this morning.
Within a matter of 3 weeks, she lost almost everyone she cared about. And then on top of that, you can't touch anyone.
Exactly.
You can't comfort them.
Imagine losing 10 members of your family and no one giving you a hug.
But I think back to what happened with the baby at the hospital. His mother came in and died, and the baby was in a box. They tested the baby and the baby was negative. But I think the symptoms in babies and the disease progression in babies is different than adults.
Right.
So the nurses would pick up and cuddle the baby, and they were taking care of the baby in the box. And then 12 of them got Ebola, and 1 survived.
Because they couldn't just watch a baby sitting alone in a box. By the time we had arrived, more than 20 nurses had died from Ebola, and nearly all of the phlebotomists had died. And so throughout the hospital you could see pictures of nurses hung up in remembrance of them. And the hospital staff would line the little roads as they carried out the bodies of their hospital staff. They've taken care of their own colleagues and watched them all die, one after another after another.
And they still go back into the wards.
Yeah.
I felt like we were on a ship, and the water was just pouring in, and there were so many holes, and we just kept bailing water, and we weren't making any difference.
You know, it just hits you really hard because you realize we're only here for 5 weeks, 6 weeks. They're here for the long haul.
Michelle Dines, epidemiologists at the CDC, who spoke at StoryCorps in Atlanta. Their conversation will be archived at the American Folk Life Center at the Library of Congress. And as always, you can get the podcast at NPR.org.
Major support for StoryCorps comes from Cancer Treatment Centers of America, combining conventional and integrative therapies to help maintain quality of life during treatment at cancercenter.com. And from Ford, the maker of the C-Max Hybrid with 5-passenger seating and 188 total system horsepower. Ford, go further.
Is Morning Edition on Michigan Radio. The Nobel Peace Prize has been given to 2 children's rights activists. We've got that story in 10 minutes. And good morning, I'm Kyle Norris.
Is more medicine the best treatment for aging and dying? I'm Ira Plato. Join me on Science Friday as Atul Gawande makes the case for less medicine, more compassion. Plus searching the depths of the oceans for the heat from climate change. Where does it go? Well, on Science Friday from PRI.
We've got that today from 2 until 4. Support for Michigan Radio comes from Old National Bank, dedicated to providing personal and business financial solutions since 1834. On the web at oldnational.com, member FDIC. Michigan Radio is a media sponsor of the Ann Arbor Chili Chowdown on Sunday, October 12th. This is going to happen at Ron's Roadside Barbecue on Pontiac Trail. The benefit for Safe House Center of Ann Arbor will feature food from over a dozen restaurants and live entertainment. Find more information on our events page, of course, at michiganradio.org. And today in the weather forecast, it's going to be sunny but cooler than it was yesterday, highs around 55. Tonight mostly clear with some patchy frost overnight, lows around 30. Tomorrow frost in the morning, but the day is going to be sunny, highs around 55. Sunday sunny, slight chance of rain, highs around 60. Monday warmer, chance of rain and thunderstorms, highs around 70. Currently 35 degrees in Grand Rapids. We've got 39 in Lansing, it's 42 in Detroit, 34 in Flint, 37 in Ann Arbor, 34 in Kalamazoo, 39 in Toledo. It's 8:30.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Martin. Did you hear the one about the horse that walked into the police station? No, really, it happened. Caught on camera in Winsford, England. The horse was escorted home, and a police spokesman had a little fun with his statement. He wrote, "We were somewhat saddled with our unexpected guest." He wrote, "The visitor quickly became the main event of the night shift, but at no point did the horse pose a risk to security." Get it? No point? It's Morning Edition.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. 2 children's rights activists are the winner of this year's Nobel Peace Prize. Kailash Satyarthi of India has been working for decades to end child slavery and exploitation. He's 60 years old. The other winner, Malala Yousafzai of Pakistan. She's the teenager shot in the head 2 years ago by the Taliban for promoting education for girls. Torbjørn Jagland is chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Committee.
Despite her youth, Malala Yousafzai has already fought for several years for the right of girls to education and has shown by example that children and young people too can contribute to improving their own situations.
Yousafzai survived that attack and is now 17 years old. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was a no-show at today's anniversary celebration in Pyongyang, and that's raising questions about his health. He hasn't been seen in public in weeks. At the same time, the BBC's Steve Evans reports on an incident that prompted North and South Korea to exchange fire.
Defectors from North Korea have been launching large balloons filled with pro-democracy messages back over the border. When they did this today, the South Korean military say that North Korean forces fired on the balloons, with the rounds landing on South Korean territory. South Korea retaliated. Initial reports say that nobody was hurt. This is the most serious incident since an exchange of shells 4 years ago. It's particularly significant because the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, failed to appear for an important anniversary, leading to speculation about his health and hold on power.
That's the BBC's Steve Evans in Seoul. The U.S. Supreme Court is blocking Wisconsin's voter ID law ahead of the November elections. Aaron Toner with member station WUWM reports that law was approved 3 years ago.
On a 6-3 vote, justices halted enforcement of voter ID in Wisconsin less than a month before the November 4th election. Opponents argued there wasn't enough time for thousands of Wisconsin residents to get the required identification and asked the Supreme Court to stay a lower court ruling that the state's voter ID law was constitutional. In a one-page ruling, some justices raised concerns that absentee ballots have been mailed with no notification of the need to present a photo ID. Republican Governor Scott Walker and lawmakers approved the law in 2011, citing the need to prevent voter fraud. For NPR News, I'm Aaron Toner in Milwaukee.
A federal judge is saying no to the voter ID law in Texas. The judge in Corpus Christi describes the law, also approved 3 years ago, as an unconstitutional burden. This is NPR News.
I'm Kyle Norris with Michigan Radio's News at 8:33. Wayne County's jail will not be relocated to the former Mountain Correctional Facility. Wayne County commissioners voted no on that idea yesterday. Commissioner Richard LeBlanc says the $750 million price tag was far too high. But LeBlanc does not like any of the other remaining options, which include restarting the downtown jail project on Gratiot.
Each of the choices that have been offered thus far are bad.
Commissioner Kevin McNamara supports restarting the Gratiot project. He says the current jail can't be renovated because it's too old, and he says Wayne County cannot afford to walk away from the $150 million it's spent so far on the Gratiot site. The new jail's construction was stopped because it was way over budget. Several people involved in the project face criminal charges. Ohio's Governor John Kasich says Chrysler insists it will cost too much money to keep building the Jeep Wrangler at its Toledo plant. The automaker wants to move Wrangler production out of the plant so it can be built with an aluminum body that will meet new gas mileage standards. Ohio and Chrysler officials met yesterday. And a program to help keep Michigan teenagers being safe drivers will include traffic safety lessons taught by young people. In 2013, there were more than 41,000 crashes in Michigan with a driver ages 15 to 19. Those crashes included 103 fatalities and 800 serious injuries. 50 schools will be selected to take part in the program. It is called the Strive for a Safer Drive. Today it's going to be sunny and cooler, highs around 55. Tonight mostly clear with some patchy frost. Overnight lows around 30. Tomorrow frost in the morning, but the day is going to be sunny and pretty and cool, highs around 55. Support for NPR comes from the Cy Sims Foundation, supporting advances in science, education, and the arts since 1985. CySimsFoundation.org.
In Dallas, public health authorities have two big jobs right now: monitoring the 48 people who had contact with an Ebola patient who died Wednesday, and keeping everyone else from becoming completely paranoid. Doctors say the risk of acquiring the virus is very small for most of us. Still, as NPR's Jeff Brady found, some people are canceling plans because of that one Ebola case in Dallas.
Just about this time of year, Abdullah Reynolds of Atlantic City has a tradition. He flies to Dallas to see his favorite football team.
And this year was no different from any other. We planned a trip to go see my Cowboys.
But then he heard about the first case of Ebola diagnosed in the U.S., in Dallas.
I'm scared for my life, and my fiance is scared. This is not like a little sickness. People are dying.
So he canceled the trip. The Dallas Convention and Visitors Bureau says it hasn't received calls like this from tourists. The group did hear from organizers of two conventions, but they seemed satisfied with the advice from the medical community that the risk of transmission is low. Even around Dallas, Dr. Seema Yasmin says some people are limiting their activities because of the Ebola case.
One colleague at the university told me that her daughter turned up to a birthday party where there should have been 60 kids and there were about 20.
Yasmin is a public health professor at the University of Texas at Dallas. She's also a writer for the Dallas Morning News, and she spent 2 years investigating disease outbreaks for the CDC. Yasmin understands why people overreact at first, but she says a little education helps. She She says to become infected, you must have contact with someone who has the signs of the disease.
If they had the virus in their body but they seem perfectly fine, they actually can't transmit the virus to you. They'd have to have fever, they'd have to have diarrhea and vomiting, and even then, you'd have to come into direct contact with their infected bodily fluids. You'd need to have cuts or breaks in your skin.
Or, she says, those bodily fluids would have to get into your mucous membranes through places like your eyes or mouth. And she points out you're more likely to catch something like the flu or measles than Ebola. Still, this doesn't change Abdullah Reynolds' mind.
No, nothing nobody can say. I don't care if the government told me it was safe to go back. I'm not going to Dallas.
Another man, Farshad Farabakhshian from Corvallis, Oregon, also had reservations about coming to Dallas for job interviews. He decided to go, but not to tell his mom.
Because she's kind of a warrior, and I knew that if she knew that I was coming to a city that had the first Ebola case in the United States, that she would kind of panic and freak out.
Farabakhshian addressed his fears by doing a little research, packing some hand sanitizer, and sticking with his travel plan.
Seeing the reality definitely calmed me down. Dallas is a huge city. I don't imagine